China's economic trajectory has been nothing short of a roller coaster, soaring to unparalleled heights before hitting a stumbling block. Once hailed as an economic powerhouse with annual growth rates averaging 10% over 3 decades, China's economy is now seeing a significant slowdown. So, what exactly has happened to the $18 trillion economy? What strategies have been used to recover from this slowdown? And what does this slowdown mean for Asia and the rest of the world as a whole? Before its revolutionary economic reforms that made China's economy boom, China faced a significant housing crisis. And when I say crisis, I mean unbelievably crowded. Take a look. Here is the average footprint of a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. This is about the average size of a kitchen in an American home, and in 1980, the average living space per person in urban China was just this much. It wouldn't be until 1985 that it reached 10 square meters, and it wasn't until the mid-1990s that it passed 15 square meters. To understand how crowded it was, these were the average living spaces in other cities around the world in 1992. Only places including Tokyo, New Delhi, and Cairo were similar to the average space in urban China. However, available space isn't the only problem when it comes to housing. Not only was urban China crowded when the world's largest rural to urban migration began, but it was also dark, dangerous, and not very modern. In 1985, most urban households didn't have piped gas, many didn't have their own toilets, and almost 40% had to share kitchens and water taps. The housing problem in China was partly because of the rapid population change and because of corruption and poverty. But mainly, there was no incentive to build. In the 1980s, the government was responsible for housing, either managed by the local government or provided by state-owned companies. But no matter how you got it, housing was cheap. Considered a right, rent was cheap, typically costing only 1 to 3% of the average income, and it wasn't linked to construction or maintenance expenses. Although this approach made sense ideologically, it was tough to convince central planners to invest more in housing. Unlike building infrastructure or heavy industry, housing didn't offer much return. But this all changed when Deng Xiaoping came out and brought with him a real estate revolution. Chapter 1, Article 10 of the Constitution of the People's Republic of China saw a simple, single-sentence addition to it in 1998. It stated, "The right to the use of land may be transferred according to law." Now, according to this law, all land was still under the ownership of the government. However, it opened up many opportunities for a host of middlemen. According to it, the government provided the local and municipal governments a right to use their land and develop it according to their liking. The local governments could now sell these lands to property developers, who would then build out housing for a growing Chinese middle class, allowing them to finance the purchase of a home at full cost. From 1998 to 2002, Chinese developers built enough stock to house the entire population of the US. The private real estate and development sector in China was red hot. According to SWFI, 6 of the world's top 10 real estate companies were either headquartered in mainland China or Hong Kong, but doing most of their projects in China. The first on this ranking was China Evergrande Group. 4 of these 6 land development companies globally emerged in the 1990s or later, experiencing a meteoric rise from obscurity to becoming industry giants in construction. These developments provided a source of revenue for local governments, enabling infrastructure development and social services. It also created millions of jobs in one of the world's most vibrant construction sectors. What was once considered a crisis became a pillar of one of the world's biggest economies. But during all those years of growth, there was a problem. This remarkable growth led to unimaginable prices. Beijing's property prices per square foot were side by side with LA's, Shenzhen's were about the same as Paris's, and Shanghai's were touching London's prices. All of this was in an economy in which an average person earns approximately 4th and 6th as much as that of the US, UK, and France. Keeping in mind the high prices of properties in China, an average person has to save a whopping 41 years of their average income to pay for an average home in Shenzhen. This comes in comparison to New York's 13 years, Vancouver's 16 years, and London's 22 years of average income. However, this did not seem to be a result of high demand clashing with limited supply. In fact, supply was at an all-time high. It just didn't seem right that almost 25% of the country's housing units were empty, millions of habitable apartments bought and paid for but never inhabited. It didn't make sense for China to have some of the highest price rates for having one of the biggest development industries in the world. Unless one considers the rather evident conclusion, the value of housing has disconnected from its actual purpose. It had become so appealing as a wealth store that it was traded primarily as a financial asset rather than a place to live. By 2018, a staggering 87% of home buyers already owned another residence, indicating that, in many cases, people were purchasing properties almost exclusively as investments. The housing market basically turned into a bubble, and the central government had to take action in order to pop it, and this is exactly what they did. In August 2020, the central government presented 3 red lines, 3 rules for the development sector to follow or face restrictions with heavy consequences. These rules included: Number 1, developers couldn't have more in liabilities than 70% of the value of the assets the company itself owns. Number 2, developers couldn't owe more in debt than the totality of what the company itself is worth in equity. And number 3, developers couldn't owe more in short-term debt than what it has in cash at a given moment. And even if the developers did not violate any of the 3 lines, they'd be capped at 50% year over year. However, if they breached one limit, the cap would be reduced to 10%. If 2 were violated, it would further drop to 5%, and if all 3 limits were breached,